And I'm going to actually start out by the fact that some of us have been at this a long time. This is from the 1970s. That's me driving the truck. Now, those are my students, and I said, the health and the wealth of the nation is in their hand, a bunch of old derelicts and hippies. That old Jeep of mine that I was driving around had a wood back, and I nailed this outhouse on the back of it to see if I would drive around town 3 days with on the back of my truck, which they don't know me. Of course I did. And then they put a sign on the back, put your organic fertilizer here. And I drove around town 3 days with that over a little bit of that. So I've been in this, I was the mid-70s. And so, yes, I came from that generation, and these people are now old and overweight and farming. So you're all going to get there. And so, anyway, this is another whole concept and idea, and I spent quite a bit of time. I read and study a lot of things besides agriculture. This is from the Heath brothers out of California, and it's about made to stick. What stuck? What stuck? What idea stuck? And he said things that really, everybody took something different out of it. We were joking about it the other day when I made that comment, because I talk fast about title German. I didn't want to spend over $10 an acre, and the people in the crowd, what stuck was they thought I said put on 10 bushel of oats per acre. Now, I don't know how it all came about, but you see, that was a wonderful practice that changed their farming operation, they said. So, but stories are what really stick with you. A lot of facts and figures you won't remember. If it comes to a story that you can internally relate to it, is how ideas stick in your head. So what did stick is a really good question. And I actually was at the National Organic Program speaking about they want to put new regulations on monitoring pastures. And I presented this whole thing. I had the book up there. And I said, don't you dare give more rules and regulations from the government with nobody to enforce them and nobody knows what they're doing. And I finally got done, and there's a lot of people, my message did stick. I was pretty dynamic about it. But anyway, do you know what that is? Can you see a picture there? It's a cow head. It's an ear, a muzzle. This is a cow head. This pole of the cow. See, once you can see it, if I go back to that, see, now it's much more obvious to see. It's like biological farming. Once you see it, doesn't matter where you go next, you can always see it again. Because it automatically pops into your mind and in your head. So biological farming is like this picture here. Once you see it, this cow head, and once you see biological farming, it isn't about trying to find the exact rule and regulation. It's about putting a system in place for the type of land you have, and you'll see that there's this chemical, physical, biological, there's a lot of things to it, and there might be different things you're attracted to, different ideas that stuck because they resonate with you, and then if you really forcefully get involved, and so you can make progress with that thing. I also like to bring this one up. I call this the Great Forgetting. This is a soil from Australia that's a virgin soil, just clear, just started to farm. And everybody gets hung up on these soil tests and things. There's higher levels of magnesium in that soil than there are calcium. And I was at a meeting in Australia, and these are Condelaries, they're vegetable growers out of Sydney. And everybody said, oh, you get that high magnesium. 70 CEC soils. You get that high magnesium, that ground is so hard, it'll be sticky, it'll be tight. And they were looking there puzzled, and I said to them, are your soils hard and tight? And he said, we don't think so. We got in the bus and went out there. Oh my gosh. It was like the Great Forgetting. We forgot what the prairies and what the soils are like when we first started plowing and tilling them. So it didn't matter that the magnesium was 40% because biology always out-trumps chemistry. It's pretty amazing. So soybeans were being grown as a cover crop. That actually was cotton in that field. Then the other thing, I know what you want. You want to do nothing. You want to make a lot of money. You want to be sustainable and problem-free. Well, lots of luck. So I think we got to, maybe that could be a nice goal. We could probably try to get there, but we're either import or export on farms. If I could sit down with you and ask enough questions, I could have a pretty good idea what your soils and your farms and what the crops and what problems you were having look like. I can do a pretty good job with dairy farms. So asking a few questions. So talking about dairy farms, this is Lewis Brownfield. I'm going back to some old times in history. It's a typical worn out meadow and Malabar farms. He's the one that wrote the book, Return to Pleasant Valley, Out of the Earth. He was a writer back in the long time ago, and he said that not only is the grass reedy but thin, but it's also nutritional values are insignificant. A cow fed this might be starving to death. Most of the Mallow farms originally looked like this barren, sickly field, and that's what Dr. Ulbrich and him. He was the farmer, Ulbrich was the scientist, and Brookside Laboratory Farms was the test. So he was the original farmer that went back in those days. So 1952, his books are fun to read. He had a field day about building 6 inches of topsoil in 5 years. Remember, if you read any fancy textbooks, it takes 500 years to build an inch of topsoil. 6 inches in 5 years. 7,000 people showed up, and they ran out of food in the community. This was back in 1950s. And I read that book, and I said, that man copied me. course, I was 40 years, I was only 8 years old at the time. But if you go back and look at that, what he had done was, it was pretty amazing. First he started growing a cover crop. Then he cut it and left it lay on the ground and he mulched it. He took a salt dust. He added all those different calcium, magnesium, all those different members, including all the trace metals, including cobalt and selenium and silica. He was adding all those things back then. And he had a rotavator and he shallow incorporated and ran a big ripper through the ground. And in over a 5-year period of time, he built 6 inches of topsoil. This is the 1950s. And so all those people showed up. And I said that I showed this picture because, you see, look, that's the best collection of antique cars I've ever found. So he said that farmers would get, what the purpose is, like you coming here, he said they got to get sparked. And sparked meant that they're excited enough to move forward and say, oh, this is a bunch of BS. So I hope in the last couple of days, if you weren't already sparked before you came here, that you kind of got sparked and it gave you some new ideas and some new directions to drag things forward with it and to kind of take charge of your farm, to move it in that biological, healthy kind of a soil profile. So they're out there with their rotavators, shallow incorporating residues, and they're out with their rippers with those old tractors way back then. And of course, they did dress a whole lot better back in those days. A lot of times they wore fancy hats and sports jackets to go right on onto the farm. So all the men, I should say women to be fair, Kitty, that's kind of the way it works. All men who have turned out worth anything have had the chief hand in their own education. So that's why, if you want it spoon-fed to you, then you'll always become this slave to agribusiness. If you get a hand in your education, and you got to be able to learn how to sort through stuff that makes sense and doesn't make sense. And you got to go to people, if you're not really good at getting out of books, then you got to get in your car and go visit and drive around and go see people. That's why I tell people, if you ride with me for 1 year and follow around where I go, you will definitely see agriculture different than you do today. Just get in my shoes for a year. Now try it for 40 years. Ooh. The same thinking that a thing has brought us this far has created the problems that the same thinking can't solve. So we can't solve the problems with new chemicals and new drugs and new biotechnology. We got to have different thinking to solve the problems that we created that got us this far. Just look at measuring and influence. These are things you can manage on your farm. You can manage roots. If you're a dairy person, you can manage feed quality, or you can measure nutrient density. That's what all these people are talking about. You can manage soil life by feeding them and changing how you do things. You can manage water infiltration. You can manage yield. You can manage how crops dry down. You can manage mineral uptake. You can manage digestibility of feed. You can manage soil structure. You can manage soil erodes. You can manage test weight. And you can manage the quality of foods. Those are all your jobs that you can have an influence on, and by changing some things you do on your farm. We plant in furrows when we plant, so we can, otherwise if you're going to cultivate and bury weeds in our maize crop, if you start level, you got to pile things up to bury a weed. If you start in furrow, things roll in the hole, it's easier to bury a little weed. And someone says, oh, that doesn't work here. In Ohio last week, he said, our heavy soil's water just stands in the trench. And the guy stands up and said, I live 5 miles from you, and I've been following this practice for the last 10 years. Water doesn't stand in my soil. See, he was just blamed his soil and where he lived. But now he's got evidence. The guy down the road 5 miles away was not having that same issue. But those are things you can actually change. And that's what we're all about. Progress has very little to do with speed, but a lot more to do with direction. Doesn't matter how fast you go there, but make sure you're going in the right direction with your thinking, and make sure you get enough evidence that you're moving in the right direction. You got to get enough evidence so you're not going the wrong way. And then blaming the system for not working. The system always works. So this is kind of interesting. I bought a farm a couple years ago, and it was an old guy. He was 90-some years old, and the reason people were fighting over the farm, and I put conservation easements on it because it's right near a big tourist thing, and I didn't want any more houses developed around there. So I put conservation easements on it. But I said, how I got it was I told the family they lived far away. And I said, but just walk out of the house. I'll clean up every piece of junk that was around here. Oh, I got the farm, but boy, oh boy, oh boy, was that a job. I went to the back of the shed, DDT. I have a 5-gallon metal container full of DDT that sat back in his granary. I wanted to put it on Craigslist to see if anybody was going to pay attention from my government. I haven't gone that far yet. We marketed it. So I put it in a plastic barrel because I don't want it to leak. But we got a lot of eagles now. Maybe we can go back to using it. So each generation of chemistry that comes along was supposed to be an improvement and safer. And Roundup, I was a real promoter when glyphosates came out because I was in favor of contact herbicides, and I thought, man, this is really safe and really wonderful because I believed the wrong people. It didn't take long to turn the other direction when we saw things weren't really working like they were supposed to, and they went from heavy doses out here. So now I do truly believe what we're coming on to the day, whether it be biological, microbial type treatments or plant protective things, I was listening to some of those booths over there, looking at some of the compounds that are coming along, plant extracts, more natural things from nature to control other things in nature, I think is probably going to be the safest, best shot we got. But again, if all we're going to do is change inputs and come up with a new thing because we got a problem, we got to go focusing on the fact that we got to prevent things and do everything we can to get those soils healthy and mineralized. Do everything you can. And if there is problems, there are some tools you could use. But if you're going to just look for new tools instead of solving your problems, you're still back in the same old spot again. You don't need my DDT. I don't know what I'd like to do with it. You guys got issues, but you don't have those. A few elephants in South Africa. You get on these guys' farms, they do grumble a little bit. They don't like electric fence. We figured that out. This is somebody talk about shiny. Dan was talking about how shiny. Well, ryegrass has got a pretty shiny leaf, and he was telling me how they grazed and managed. This group of people in the eastern Cape of South Africa, they manage 70,000 cows. There's 1,000 cows. There's one farm unit, and it's year-round grazing. In the summertime, it gets so hot, and they have native kikuyu grass, which is really lignified, and cows don't do very well. They actually feed maize silage with it. In the winter times, when the cows give the most milk, on ryegrass and clover, so they do in the spring, the kikuyu grass goes dormant in the winter. And then, so when it gets to be close to coming in the fall and the winter, they scarf the soil with a piece of equipment to beat it up to get the ryegrass and the red clover planted before it gets too cold. So if it gets really cold, it grows really slow. If they get a jump on it before it gets really cold, it keeps right on growing. And he was holding up a blade of grass to tell me how they had to graze it really tight. When I got there, the reason they came about, this is back a few years ago, when nitrogen prices went really high and grain prices went really high. And he said, oh, we're going down. So we got to figure this out. And he said they were putting on 600 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Whoo, whoo, year round. Every month they put on another 50 units of nitrogen, 50 units for every other month, and 600 kilos in. And so anyway, and then they were all no-tilling it in there because they grew maize in between, and that was their pastures. And then they were putting out grain out there because that's not very nutritious and very looking things out here. I said, well, can't we grow something in between? I kept saying, can't we bulk spread this and get this thing out there thicker? This guy here came over and got trained by me, Steve Moss, and he read my book. And so they had to cut their nitrogen, and they were using 2 tons of grain for a cow a year got fed, which is about 15 pounds of grain a cow a day during the milk period. So they're feeding about 2 tons a cow a year. So he came over and got trained, but he read my book first, and it said in my book, we got to put this calcium on. So then, these are 50, 60, 70 CEC soils. So he also listened to Neil Kinsey, and Kinsey, he sent recommendations to Kinsey, and you guys know some of you guys know who Kinsey is. Another one, him and I are the same age. We went to Brookside training together. And so anyway, Kinsey said, put on 12 tons of high calcium lime to change your soils. So then he read my book, and I said, we use burnt hydrated lime. And I tell people to put on about 1,000 pounds, and he said, so I put on 2 tons an acre. And I said, why did you put 2 tons an acre? He said, well, 1,000 pounds seemed like an embarrassment after Kinsey recommended 12 tons. So he had his budget. He took his fertilizer budget and cut the budget in half because it's nitrogen. So I said, that's called job insecurity. He took his nitrogen and cut it in half and took the money to buy the calcium because he had to live within that budget. He works for somebody who owns this land out here. So what had happened was he started getting legumes on his pasture, and his pastures really changed. And what really happened was this one of the farms where there's an old red soil digging down in the ground. That's called really getting into the dirt. What happened was they went out one day and 57 dead cows laying in the pasture. And they figured it out after a while. It was armyworms or cutworms were attacking the kikuyu grass. And the kikuyu grass built up a poison so strong it killed the cows. I said, why didn't you bottle this stuff? Must be a medicine for somebody. But then, of course, they said, so we really think about this. That plant had to be healthy enough to build up that compound to kill those armyworms and cutworms and the cows. But Steve did not get that. Armyworms and cutworms were not on his farm. And so then we also went along out here on Steve's kind of a farm, and so I started getting them to do a better job putting the calcium on. And he had earthworms in his soil, and nobody else had earthworms. And he had a better balance of legumes. So that was why we had a field days out there. And so they started putting more clover on us, put this calcium on. So their opinion was they needed to put on about per acre, now I'll go, they were putting on 10 to 15 pounds of red clover seed per acre. I told them 2 or 3 pounds. But he said, that 2 or 3 pounds, that stuff doesn't even grow. But they wouldn't listen, so they started pouring the calcium on, and there they are 3 years later. Oh, solid red clover. The grasses no longer could compete. It's like they fertilized for those, and that's what you get. I don't know if my next picture isn't what I wanted to be. So, see, Dr. Albrecht, everybody talks about Albrecht. He was not a soils guy. He was a microbiologist, and in 1916, he patented an organism a rhizobium organism inoculate clover. And it failed. So we went back and started doing these pot studies to figure out why is inoculant failed. University of Kansas, 1916, he got his PhD on that rhizobium inoculant for clover. And that's how we came up with those ratios. So it was nothing, it was about getting his inoculant to work. He said, it doesn't do any good to bring the bull unless the cow is ready. Putting on that inoculant, unless those sows are ready, does not do you any good. That's what he was trying to tell you. And that's where those ratios, and he went after two things, calcium and phosphorus. Those are the two things you start with. He brought up his calcium and phosphorus. Next thing you know, the inoculant started to work. And he got all these different ratios, all came about inoculant working. This is a farm up in Michigan. That's our consultant, and that's a farmer. This farmer says, oh, I got a 7 pH, and I got high calcium levels. I don't need to put any extra calcium on. See that? This guy, one day, he knew he was gone. Their neighbors, these guys were having a lot of fun. He pulled in the field and just made a circle with his fertilizer buggy and left. Now, I don't know if you got neighbors like that or not. He said, I knew right away when it started to green up what had happened. He said, I knew because he'd been talking about putting on available calcium, sulfur, and boron. My point is, calcium, sulfur, and boron is where you kind of got to start. I don't know what that is. This is really interesting. You guys don't grow soybeans. But our potential is unbelievable. See, a soybean plant would normally get 30 to 40 pods on a plant. We're out in South Dakota, and this year, I mentioned that the other day, this is 200 pods on one plant. That should be equivalent to bushels. The highest record yield on soybeans right now is 173 bushel. State averages are around 40 bushel. These Hutterites out there in these poor South Dakota low rainfall soils started foliar feeding and fooling around, and that one was 200 pods, and this year they found one that was over 500 pods. So theoretically, if we have the right plant population, that's a 500 bushel soybean crop. Now nobody knows. The Hutterite colonies are just standing there in awe. We have no idea what's going on. We have no idea why all of a sudden they decide to have a lot of babies. We don't know. Maybe it thinks it's coming to an end and needs to quick have babies to keep its population around. So another thing, this is for your dairy people. What country is that? New Zealand, South Island of New Zealand. About numbers of years ago, the sheep market was down to the bottom of the barrel, and these guys were selling lambs to the UK, certified organic. And so I got over there at a conference, and 200 sheep people were at this conference, and they wanted to know about going organic with their sheep, because they were getting $100 a lamb organic and $50 conventional, and the conventional guys were spending $30 in dips, drenches, and drugs and wormers. And so I got over to speak, so they said, where do you want to stay, in a motel or on a ranch? I said, well, I'm staying in a lot of motels. I'd love to stay in the ranch. They said, what do you eat? I said, whatever you serve. Now, that's a mistake. I walked in the house, and the place reeked with mutton. They didn't eat their high-quality lambs. They sold those, and they ate those old muttons. Those kids would take a piece of mutton, cut a slab off, put it between two pieces of bread, put some mustard on, and head off to school. By the end of the week, I couldn't even smell mutton. I learned how to I like lamb now. And before that, I couldn't eat it. I learned my little lesson. So their Methodist systems out here, this was the guy, another old hippie guy. He's been, since 1989, he was certified organic. His dad died of cancer, and his mother says, you are not going to use those dips, drenches, and drugs, because I think that's what caused your dad to get cancer. You're going to farm it organically. And he said they had 5,000 ewes, and he said they were fairly well off. And he said we traveled the world. And I began to realize that other people in the world didn't farm like we did in New Zealand. So he said, I had to come up with change how we did some things. So he said, when we came back, everybody wanted his check, but nobody figured out what he did. And so I tell people, I'm going to take this to a dairy store. So I got to visiting when I had dinner with him the night before, and I said, he said, well, I do. I said, how come you don't have to use the dips, drenches, and drugs? And he said, well, I don't know. He said, I tell you one thing for sure, he said, if I had to switch breeds right up front, that's a woolless variety, and that's an old variety, they don't have twins, and they don't have to spend their energy growing wool. And he only wanted to have a single. He's 100% grass-based, organic. So he said, because we're very religious people, it says in the Bible to leave your land lay fallow once every 7 years. So he took 1/7 of our farm, we laid fallow. And right before lambing, I turned the ewes in the fallow land. Just think, they got some all tall, stockpiled dead grass. They got little succulent grass, and they don't have a belly full of parasites. If you go back to my other picture, they eat it right to the dirt. New Zealand doesn't stockpile feed. They let them get skinny until the new grass starts to grow. And then where they were lambing out there on the conventional farm, there's solid little cheek turds everywhere, and the ewe was eating grass this tall, full of nitrates and protein. She got mastitis, meatritis, and she gave twice as much milk as the poor little lamb could drink, and then the lamb died. He said, guys, they all wanted what he got, but not a single one of them wanted to put a good dry cow program in place. I'm a dairy guy. I changed farm after farm. That's how I started this business. Give me your dry cows. Let me feed your dry cows, because the old days we made dry cow feed and fed it to all the cows. And then we all of a sudden started making better feed for the milk cows and still kept feeding it to the dry cows. I said, give me your dry cows and give me your forages and I'll change your farm. I set up an ideal dry cow program. He set up an ideal dry cow program for those sheep. And I tell these people, you don't have to join his church, but you sure better follow those principles. You never change things by fighting the existing reality to change something. You build a new model that makes the existing one obsolete. That's Buckminster Fuller. This is a free-range chicken operation in Australia. Well, I think they were hungry. They were trying to eat whatever on our boots. I don't know what they were after. They were attacking us. But he had 12,000 chickens rather, and he lose about half a year. The fox was so smart that the woman said would dig holes under the fence, some creatures would, and the fox, they had dogs out there. The fox would trick the dogs to go here, and then the other half, the fox went in here and took the chickens. It took them 1 week for the fox to outsmart the dogs. But anyway, so this is that soil in New Zealand, what that thing looked like out here. And see, this is another one out here. What do you think this farm looks like? Talk about a shiny sheen look on the cattle. You can see where I am. I'm still in New Zealand. And I showed up that day because these guys were switching also to dairy herds from sheep because they thought there was money in dairying. So on the day I showed up, this is what they're grazing those sheep on. This guy had like 600-700 cows, and I showed up. We got there an hour early, and he was apologizing because they didn't have a time to drag the dead cows out before we got there. Come on, where'd you go? See how nice and shiny she is? Oh, she's eating that diet. Oh, I have a gut ache looking at what the poor thing was coming out the back end. You know, I tell the people, look what she's living on. And these fresh cows out here, that's what they have to eat. And that's why they're going to have parasites. That's stressing those little poor buggers beyond their limits. And of course, we had a lot of discussions about that. Notice this, they're plowing right up and down the hill. You see, they've never done these things before. They used to graze, and now they're going back into farming with a plow. There's a lot of things that had to be learned on the South Island. So, anyway, this is, I tried to change the pictures of the colors. I'm not a computer guru guy. You have to bear with me. A step-by-step plan for biological farming. First, you evaluate the plant's growing, the soil structure, the nutrient test, and the farm's uniformity of test. You start out with evaluating. Number 2 is you look at the soil correction. You start out there, you take a soil test. You always start with calcium and phosphorus. You pull a soil test, and soil tests are about adding what's short. And if you got enough, don't add any more. I brought that up several times. That's got to stick. Soil tests are not about anything magic. They're they're straightforward, simple. And you can always start with calcium and phosphorus, and you get those numbers up there, and then you put on a crop fertilizer that might have the trace minerals and different things in for your crop. And, of course, you also start with calcium and phosphorus, soil correction, and you use local sources wherever possible. Then your crop fertilizer always includes some soluble calcium in the fertility program, but it's a balanced diet for your crop. It's above and beyond the ability your soil has to dish out nutrients. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be very little, or you probably don't have to, if you don't want to do that at all, you got things like calcium and sulfur and boron you're never done with. You got to figure out how to get them. And so a crop fertilizer could be a foliar, it could be a dry. It does add those things that are uniquely hard to get, or maybe some trace minerals or some things that you would really get on board. And then, of course, number 4 is air, water, and feed the soil. It's all about soil life and control grazing, green crops, manure, compost, and do our subsoilings to get air back in the ground. This is the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation School of Architect, Taliesin. There's 30,000 visitors come here. We got organic, and the organic inspector kind of thought we shouldn't use fertilizer. He never forgot that day, because I'm standing there kicking the dirt at him. I said, I showed you yesterday our lucerne crops, thick, beautiful stands of alfalfa. This farm was so run down, I've been rented for 40 years. There wasn't enough nutrients even to grow anything. There's no legumes growing out here. And I said, if you think I can survive farming without fixing these soils, without putting any inputs on this land, you're absolutely crazy. I said, now, I'm not saying once it's fixed, I don't necessarily have to keep fixing it. I said, but you couldn't even grow a legume. It was so farmed out, if you want to put it that way. And so we had to put some of those things back in. So anyway, we're trying to start a real agricultural training education center here to bring on young kids to not only give them an opportunity to farm, vegetable farming we're talking about, but also to bring on the school people and tell them, or young children and university researchers, and we want to take the whole 800-acre estate and turn it into an education training learning center about how food should be grown, how you manage your woodlands, how you manage your ponds and waters. Right now they're solid scum, and we're going to figure out where that nutrients come from. And I said, I'm willing to do the DNA testing. It better not be coming from our farm, and we use manures. But we also don't let it run off the farm. So where do you start? Knowledge. Get yourself smart. Get some knowledge. Get this thing figured out. Don't just take one piece of advice, read a lot of them and sort through. Now what you may sort through and take as knowledge, there's a lot of common ground in what a lot of people write and talk about. Remove the negatives. It could be too much salt. It could be too much tillage. It could be whatever you could see as a negative. Some extreme imbalance that's taking place in your soils. You got to figure out how to get rid of your negatives. Always, if you got just a few, you always start with an available calcium source, sulfur and boron. I tell our American farmers, you're down on dollars. Dairy farming's tough. Do not back off of that right there. You got to keep your available calcium source, sulfur and boron, every year, every acre. Whatever that budget may allow. I want at least 25 pounds of sulfur, I want a pound of actual boron, and I want probably a couple 100 pounds of actual soluble calcium. It's not that expensive to do. It could be gypsum with some boron added to it. That's your very minimum input right there. That's the bottom of the barrel. And of course, ideally, I'd like to use a balanced fertilizer, but if money doesn't allow it, and if you've been at this long enough, a lot of our good biological farmers are riding the low prices out by actually mining things off their land that they bought when good conditions were good. So they really got to be low input now. They aren't necessarily going to stay that way, but they're doing just fine by mining their land at this point in time. And then, of course, I want to deal with carbon and biology. So my end of it is really here. Every farmer is always comparing the guy over the fence, and man's and women's egos are in the middle of their farms too, and everybody's got pride. I like to take a seed corn or a really poor, weedy crop and put it right next to a major highway. It gets the competition out of this business. Because our neighbors look at that and say, I'm not going organic, look at that mess. So you got to have courage. You put that right next to a major highway. Anyway, that's how we farm. It's a nice story. I don't mind being laughed at. Come on. I'm okay. I've fallen off of stages. I've tripped over a lot of things. Fell backwards off a stage. I walked into an electric fence standing in water one time and jumped 30 feet ahead. They don't remember what I said, but everybody was that when I fell off the stage. It was right after I had back surgery. And when I jumped on that fence, they all remember the event. That stuck. I said, what did I talk about that day? And that didn't stick. So we went to the neighbors and grabbed the cob of corn, and we went to a good biological farmer and grabbed the cob of corn. Of course, we went back down, we threw them into the chickens. The chickens only ate one of them. Here's that chicken with that little bitty head and that little bitty brain, and he's got it all figured out, and you struggle. And when it's all said and done at the end of the day, there you are. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here. And thank you. I think we got to have fun and enjoy this thing too, by the way. So there's got to be a little bit of pleasure in life. So